The second season of the series begins with a character named Bonnie driving her car and stopping at a gas station. The gas station attendant, recognizing her from their school days, is surprised when she asks for a knife. He inquires about her life, asking if she is married or has children, only to learn that Bonnie has psychological disorders that cause her to behave strangely. It's also revealed that she was in prison for deliberately killing someone, which shocks the attendant until he thinks she's joking. Bonnie forces a smile, reassures him she won't kill again, pays for her purchases, and leaves. Inside her car, a gun and a photo of Elisa, who appears to be Bonnie's next target, are visible. In the past, when Bonnie was a child, her mother was strict, always pushing her to be perfect in everything. Despite answering almost all of her mother's questions about country capitals correctly, Bonnie is punished for one wrong answer by having her toy cut up. Her mother, due to financial constraints, always prepares cheap meals, which displeases Bonnie's father, who spends most of his time working in the garden. At 17, Bonnie learns her father has been fired but hasn't told the family to avoid upsetting them. Pretending to go to work, he drives around aimlessly, but when his wife discovers the truth, she furiously destroys the plants in the garden, leading him to decide to leave the family. He tells Bonnie he's going to buy milk and will return, but he never does. This abandonment makes Bonnie's mother even harsher, especially when she finds Bonnie's lipstick and forces her to eat it, claiming it's what failing girls wear. At school, Bonnie goes to the bathroom to cry. Feeling depressed, when a girl with braided hair and her friends bully Bonnie, she retaliates by cutting off the girl's braid. This leads to her expulsion, and Bonnie, indifferent, asks to keep the braid, but the headmistress refuses. After failing her exams a year later, Bonnie lies to her mother about her grades, enrolls in a university, and works in the library. Her interactions with students reveal her mental health issues. She's not a student there due to her high school failure. Intrigued by Professor Clive, who also has psychological disorders, Bonnie starts attending his lectures. When Clive sees a student using someone else's book, he angrily throws it out of the classroom. Bonnie is fascinated by Clive's odd behavior and becomes flustered when he gives her a suspicious look while announcing his new book. One day, Clive visits Bonnie at the library and tells her he knows she is not a student at the university and doesn't want her attending his lectures anymore. Angered, Bonnie steals Clive's poster. The next day, Clive returns to the library with the poster, revealing that someone defecated on it. Upon discovering Bonnie was responsible, Clive admires her audacity and invites her to his home for a drink once a week, on the condition that she can attend his lectures. Bonnie visits Clive's house, where he serves her an alcoholic drink she doesn't like. She doesn't share much about herself, so Clive asks why she attends his lectures. Bonnie admits she was impressed by his famous quote, "Nothing in life has meaning." Clive tells her that geniuses, like himself, often didn't do well in school and compliments her beauty. He deceives and seduces her, comparing her to salmon swimming against the current. After taking advantage of her, Clive gives her money for a taxi. As she leaves, he mentions he might fall in love with her someday. Following this encounter, Bonnie's perception of Clive changes. She continues to attend his lectures and notices him winking at her. During her second week at his house, she asks if he has fallen in love with her. Clive says no and dismissively sends her away. Alone, Clive drinks alcohol and watches his recordings of assaulting and killing girls, finding a sense of inner peace. In the library, a student returns books to Bonnie, with Clive watching. To make Clive jealous, Bonnie pretends to be interested in the student. Jealous, Clive asks her to come to his house the next night to film her. When she inquires why not today, he says he's busy and leaves. Despite this, Bonnie visits Clive's house the same day and sees another girl leaving. When the girl leaves, Bonnie smashes Clive's car with a brick. Clive lets her into his house and lies that the girl was threatening to expose and fire him unless he slept with her. Claiming the girl was in love with him, Clive pretends to be angry and kicks Bonnie out. Bonnie decides to take revenge on the girl. She waits for her to leave the house for a morning run, follows her with her car, accelerates, and runs the girl over, killing her. Bonnie uses the girl's phone to call an ambulance. Bonnie is arrested for murder and spends time in prison. She receives a letter from Clive declaring his love for her. Despite being in prison, Bonnie is elated by Clive's declaration, unaware that he is manipulating her. She sends him a romantic letter, calling herself his salmon. Later, she receives a final letter from Clive and learns of his death. Distraught, Bonnie screams hysterically in her cell. Returning to the present, Bonnie reads Clive's last letter and looks at Elisa's photo. She exits her car with a hidden gun in her jacket and heads to Elisa's house, asking her mother if Elisa is there while smiling devilishly. Elisa, dressed in a wedding gown, reminisces about the incident when James was shot. Her mother, Gwen, sees her in the dress and says she looks like a princess. Elisa feels that her wedding will be worse than her experiences with James. A year earlier, Following the incident, Elisa is sentenced to community service for her crimes with James. Returning to school, she misses James and sits alone, feeling isolated as students stare at her due to her newfound infamy. Elisa changes her hairstyle and color to try to forget her old self. She overhears her mother, Gwen, pleading with her husband, Tony, not to leave her. Gwen later tells Elisa that she left Tony and kicked him out. Elisa knows her mother is lying. Gwen becomes irritable and depressed, often talking to herself. Unable to bear being at home, she decides to move elsewhere with her daughters. Gwen suggests Elisa could either continue her education, work, or marry a rich man to support her. Elisa and her mother move in with her Aunt Lay, who owns a cafe in the forest. Elisa admires Lay's tough demeanor. Lay allows them to stay with her indefinitely. After a year, Gwen remains depressed, constantly sharing her troubles with Lay. Elisa is relieved that her mother has someone else to talk to, giving her more personal space, but she struggles with depression and emotional numbness. She fondly recalls her time with James on a high bridge and contemplates suicide. Elisa works as a waitress in Lay's cafe, tasting the rudeness she once dished out to other waitresses. A rude young customer insults her name. She meets Todd, a rowing instructor, who talks about odd things like the non-existence of Finland, supposedly a fabrication of the Cold War by Russia. Todd is pleased to learn Elisa likes him and acts naively. Over time, Elisa confides in Todd about her past with James and their crimes. Todd shows no reaction and asks if she likes fajita chicken. Elisa grows more fond of him and proposes marriage, which he accepts, partly to move on from James and lead a normal life. They return to the cafe, where Elisa shows Gwen the engagement ring Todd gave her. Fast forward to the present, Elisa is in her wedding dress, with her wedding scheduled for the next day. Gwen uses her divorce settlement from Tony to fund Elisa's wedding expenses. Elisa feels genuinely happy for the first time in years, smiling strangely. Meanwhile, a red car is parked outside, ominously watching them. Elisa checks her mailbox and finds an envelope containing a box. Inside the box is a bullet with her name engraved on it. Elisa is not threatened by the bullet itself, but is concerned that the person who engraved it spelled her name wrong and knows where she lives. She discards the bullet in the trash and returns to the cafe, where she sees the red car parked outside. While working, her psychological issues begin to surface, and she imagines a customer asking when she will kill herself. Elisa asks her Aunt Lay about the red car, but Lay has no idea about it. While grilling burgers in the kitchen, Elisa realizes she has mental problems that make her believe the owner of the red car wants to harm her. She tries to ignore it and continues cleaning the cafe floor. When she steps outside to dispose of dirty water, the door locks behind her. Seeing the red car still there, she approaches it, yelling, only to be shocked when she discovers that the car's owner is James. James remembers the past incident when he was shot, ending his love story with Elisa tragically. In the past, James is in the hospital, under police watch 24/7, awaiting trial once he recovers. His father, Phil, shows more interest in James's hospital food than in James himself. James asks his father about Elisa, but Phil has no idea. James and Elisa are not allowed to see each other, but he constantly thinks about her. James recalls his father's reaction to learning about his gunshot wound. Phil was eating and crying at the same time. The doctor tells James he's lucky to be alive, but James doesn't feel lucky. He feels he is being punished for his actions and deserves it. Gwen, Elisa's mother, visits James in the hospital to check on him. When James asks about Elisa, Gwen insists he must break up with her daughter, blaming him for everything that happened to Elisa. She argues that he is no longer suitable for her daughter, as he is now disabled and confined to a wheelchair and might even go to jail. Gwen produces a paper and persuades James to write a breakup letter to Elisa, asking him to include harsh words so that her daughter will hate him. Eventually, James is convinced by Gwen's arguments and writes the letter. Months pass, and James learns that Elisa has read his letter because he hasn't received a reply. He becomes depressed and can't stop thinking about her. James undergoes physical therapy to regain the ability to walk. On the day of his court appearance, he is fortunate not to be jailed, as he had been defending a woman from assault, and Clive's videos helped prove his innocence. His father, Phil, buys a new red car to replace the one James had blown up. After the incident, Phil decides to take courses to become a better father. He expresses pride in James, and their relationship improves significantly. They go bowling together, where James manages to walk again without crutches or a wheelchair. Phil bowls a strike and celebrates loudly. When it's James's turn, he also wins, but he realizes he has lost something much more important: his father, who suddenly dies of a heart attack right behind him. James attends his father's funeral and carries a jar containing his father's ashes. Unable to return to their house without his father, James sleeps in his car, hugging the jar. One day, he wakes up in the car and shaves his beard in the mirror. A postal worker delivers a letter to him. Opening the envelope, James finds the same bullet that was sent to Elisa, but with his name on it. Fearing for Elisa's safety, he decides to go to her house, but he arrives too late. Elisa and her mother have already sold the house and moved. James eventually finds out the address of Lay's cafe and goes there. Seeing Elisa in the cafe, he is happy to finally see her again. However, everything changes when he sees Todd with Elisa. James decides to watch Elisa from a distance and observes her trying on a wedding dress. Unable to stay away because she is the closest person to him after his father's death, James is shocked when Elisa finally notices him. Returning to the present, James and Elisa meet again after their long separation. Elisa's first comment to James is that he needs a shower because he smells bad. They enter the cafe together, and Elisa introduces James to Lay, revealing that he is the James she had talked about. When James shows Lay the bullet he received, Elisa secretly worries but outwardly pretends not to care, suggesting it might be a prank from someone at school. Elisa observes that James now appears burdened and depressed. After their conversation, she tells him that she is getting married the next day, and James, already aware, congratulates her. Lay notices that James's car has a significant problem, so she decides to call a mechanic to fix it the next day. Elisa learns that James has been sleeping in his car for months, and Lay offers him to spend the night at her lakeside house. When James asks about a bathtub, she jokingly tells him he can bathe in the lake. Before leaving, Elisa tells James she would have invited him to her wedding if it wouldn't have been weird, expressing regret that he came to see her, and leaves upset. The next day, Elisa wears her wedding dress and discovers that her mother has rented an expensive limousine for her to go to the wedding. She smiles and thanks her mother. James wakes up, bathes in the lake, and feels upset that Elisa is marrying someone else. Elisa enters the church and stands before Todd. The mechanic returns James's repaired car. James drives aimlessly until Elisa, in her wedding dress, suddenly appears in front of him. Approaching his car, she tells him, "Let's get out of here." They drive off together, with James waiting for the right moment to confess his love for Elisa. Elisa asks him to keep driving anywhere far away. James mentions wanting to scatter his father's ashes, but doesn't know where. They stop at a restaurant, where the waitress congratulates them, mistaking them for newlyweds because James is in a suit and Elisa is in her wedding dress. Elisa lies, saying they're coming from a funeral. James notices that Elisa has changed and no longer enjoys food as before. When he apologizes for the letter he sent her, Elisa pretends she has forgotten what was in it, but she actually remembers every word. The letter stated that James didn't want to see her again because he had to kill someone because of her, that he hated her, and she should hate him too and leave him alone. When James suggests they leave without paying, like old times, Elisa points out that it would cause the waitress to pay for their meal. Elisa leaves the restaurant angrily, with James following after paying the bill. He wants to tell her he loves her but can't find the words. Elisa regrets leaving her wedding to run away with James and decides to go back, but they find that their car has been towed because James parked illegally. James cries because his father's ashes are in the car. James and Elisa go to the car garage where the guard tells them they need to pay $400 to retrieve their car. Elisa lies to the guard, claiming she and James just got married and spent all their money on the honeymoon, but the guard remains unsympathetic and refuses to return the car. James explains that his father's ashes are in the car and asks for just the jar, but the guard insists on payment for the fine first. Elisa learns from the guard that the garage closes at 5 p.m. and leaves with James. They decide to wait until 5 p.m. to break into the garage and retrieve the car. While waiting, they talk until Elisa falls asleep and James covers her with his jacket. Sitting beside her, James confesses his love for her, but when she wakes up and asks what he said, James changes the subject, saying it's 5 p.m. and they move. However, they find out the guard stays in the garage 24 hours. They get into the car, planning to ram the exit gate, but James hits it gently. The guard comes out yelling, and James drives off at high speed, breaking the gate and escaping. They laugh, reminiscing about their old days together. On their way, they encounter a woman on the road, and Elisa asks James to stop and pick her up, unaware that it's Bonnie, who intends to kill them. Bonnie gets in the car and reveals she sent them the bullets with their names. She had been watching them at the garage and has a gun in her bag. Before getting in, she had stabbed the car tire with a knife from her pocket. While driving, Bonnie stares at them, thinking about the time they killed her lover, Clive. James is surprised by Elisa's sudden change in helping people. Elisa tells Bonnie she must have been in danger or mentally unstable to be on the road alone at that time. The three acquaint themselves, and Bonnie behaves oddly, waiting for something. Suddenly, the car breaks down and Bonnie quickly gets out, retrieving the knife from the tire. James discovers he doesn't have a spare tire, and Elisa, frustrated, leaves to relieve herself in the woods, leaving James alone with Bonnie. Bonnie asks for water, and as James searches inside the car, she prepares to pull her gun from the bag to kill him. Suddenly, Elisa returns, announcing she saw saw a nearby hotel. They push the car to the hotel, which looks eerie and isolated. Upon entering the hotel, the manager congratulates James and Elisa on their marriage. James goes to the bathroom, contemplating a plan. The manager calls a car maintenance center and learns they can fix James's car the next day. Bonnie decides to rent 2 rooms on her expense, one for herself and one for James and Elisa, as a thank you for rescuing her on the road. When Elisa and James enter their room at the hotel, Elisa tells James it was the last available room, though he's unaware that all the rooms are empty. James notices that the room's wall has sharp deer antlers that could cause injury. When he suggests checking on Bonnie, Elisa expresses her suspicion about Bonnie's strange behavior. Still, they decide to visit her since she paid for their stay. Bonnie is in the bathroom, practicing how to kill James and Elisa with her gun in the mirror. When they knock, she hides the gun in the trash bin and comes out. James invites Bonnie for a drink, and they go to the hotel's bar, where they discover that the manager also serves as the bartender, cleaner, and everything else due to the hotel's lack of guests and staff. The 3 drink together, and Bonnie asks Elisa personal questions, irritating her. Bonnie reveals she was about to get married, but her fiancé was killed. Suddenly, the manager appears and harasses Bonnie, prompting Elisa to shout at him and push him away from Bonnie. Elisa recalls her wedding day when her mother pointed out Todd, telling Elisa she was very lucky to have a man like him. Elisa had stolen an envelope from the wedding gifts and ran away. She snaps out of her memories and goes back to her room, while James feels uneasy about Bonnie's actions and follows Elisa. Elisa enters the bathroom, cries while looking at her wedding dress, and then changes her clothes. Bonnie tells the manager she is waiting for James and Elisa to fall asleep, unaware that she plans to kill them. He offers her a drink. Elisa asks James about what happened to him after the beach incident. He tells her he couldn't walk and that his father died. Meanwhile, at the bar, when the manager approaches Bonnie again, she leaves and heads to her room. James wants to confess that Elisa's mother forced him to write the breakup letter, but he changes his mind when Elisa asks him to kiss her. He reveals he became infertile after his accident and cries, while Elisa sympathetically hugs him. Bonnie returns to her room and retrieves the gun from the trash. Suddenly, the manager brings towels and enters her room without permission, harassing Bonnie. She pulls out the gun and orders him to leave, but he doesn't listen and approaches her, pleading not to be hurt. As Bonnie puts the gun on the table, it falls to the floor, discharges accidentally, and shoots the manager in the head, killing him. However, his body falls onto Bonnie, who is standing near the sharp deer antlers on the wall. She is injured in her abdomen by the antlers, loses consciousness, and collapses onto the manager's body. Bonnie demonstrates remarkable resilience as she recovers from her ordeal. She finds herself standing over the corpse of a manager who was murdered, and the sight terrifies her. Noticing a bleeding wound on her back, she wakes Elisa from sleep on the bed and rouses James, who had been sleeping in the bathroom tub. When they descend to the reception desk, they discover that the manager's body is missing. Bonnie then drags the manager's corpse and conceals it in a closet. James, unaware of Bonnie's state of undress, knocks on the door. Bonnie deceives him by claiming she is not dressed and unable to leave the room. She later opens the door, revealing to James that she was, in fact, fully clothed and had lied to him. James asks Bonnie for a loan to cover car repair costs. Elisa observes Bonnie's peculiar behavior, suspecting it stems from her intimate encounter with the manager the previous night. Meanwhile, a mechanic inspecting James's car realizes that the punctured tire was not an accident, but a deliberate act, leaving James perplexed and Elisa suspecting Bonnie's involvement. Bonnie then joins James and Elisa in the car, having stolen a part of Elisa's dress. She requests James to drive her to her sister's house. Elisa confronts Bonnie about her actions, but Bonnie is initially frightened until she realizes Elisa is referring to her affair with the manager. Feeling unwell, Bonnie exits the car and collapses on the ground. Inside the car, Elisa tells James to forget about their kiss the previous day and expresses her desire to return to her mother. James agrees to take Bonnie to her sister's first. Bonnie asks to be taken to a pharmacy, where she purchases bandages and requests painkillers from the pharmacist, who notices her bleeding back and suspects she is being harmed. Bonnie, however, assures him she is fine and asks to use the pharmacy bathroom. James returns to the car with money for Bonnie, who is taking longer than expected in the pharmacy. Elisa rudely orders him to check on Bonnie. In the bathroom, Bonnie treats her back wound and recalls her past as she looks in the mirror. James enters the pharmacy, searching for Bonnie, but the pharmacist, suspecting James is harming her, denies seeing her and pretends no one has entered for hours. James returns to Elisa, reporting that Bonnie has escaped, but at that moment, Bonnie exits the pharmacy and suggests they go to a restaurant. At the restaurant, James gives Bonnie the money, and Elisa, puzzled by Bonnie's behavior, asks her to explain what happened. Bonnie reveals her lover was killed, reminding Elisa of Clive's death. Elisa retreats to the bathroom to compose herself, where she sees blood on her reflection from from Clive's murder. She decides they should quickly take Bonnie to her sister and take their food to go. Bonnie realizes she left her gun in the pharmacy bathroom and returns to find it missing. Meanwhile, James is upset with Elisa's treatment of him and confesses that his mother, Gwen, forced him to send a distressing message to Elisa. Back at the pharmacy, Bonnie threatens the pharmacist with a knife to retrieve her gun. James, in the car with Elisa, shares his own struggles and feelings of unrequited love. Bonnie eventually retrieves her gun from the terrified pharmacist, who wets himself in fear. She warns him not to call the police, or she will return to kill him. Exiting the pharmacy, Bonnie is shocked to find that James and Elisa have left her behind. Elisa exits the car without bidding farewell to James and heads to her Aunt Lay's house. Feeling remorseful, she apologizes to her mother, Gwen, for her actions. Gwen, in turn, urges Elisa to apologize to Todd, whom she abandoned on their wedding day. Elisa's refusal to do so frustrates Gwen, who enters the house angrily. Lay then speaks with Elisa, explaining that Gwen is embarrassed by the wedding fiasco and lamenting the wasted expenses. Elisa decides to reimburse her mother for the wedding costs and asks Lay to help her return to her job at the cafe. She also resolves to meet Todd. Meanwhile, Bonnie arrives at the location where James and Elisa previously encountered her, a spot in the forest where her car is hidden among the trees. She drives off. James, still in his car, reflects on his father and is approached by Lay, who inquires about his plans. James is unsure of what to do next. Elisa visits Todd's house, where she is met by his irritated sister, Aji, who prevents her from seeing Todd. Lay joins James in the car and they engage in conversation. Lay suggests that James scatter his father's ashes at the place where his parents first met. She wishes him well and encourages him to move on. Elisa, meanwhile, waits outside Agi's house for hours until Agi finally comes out and sits with her. Agi learns that Elisa fled the wedding out of fear, but she doesn't find this an adequate justification. She eventually reveals Todd's location to Elisa. As James heads to scatter his father's ashes, he spots Bonnie driving recklessly in the opposite direction, her face showing anger. He is surprised to see Bonnie with a car and becomes suspicious, deciding to follow her. Elisa reaches Todd, who is visibly upset and frustrated. He shows her a spot in the forest where he planned to build their house. Elisa tells him she cannot live with him and asks for a divorce. Todd becomes angry, questioning why she proposed marriage in the first place and accusing her of being unworthy of partnership due to her poor treatment of others. Gwen steps out of the house and sees Bonnie spying. She confronts Bonnie, who lies, claiming to be Elisa's friend and knowing that Elisa works at the cafe. Elisa returns to her job at the cafe, troubled by her actions towards Todd and James. Bonnie, meanwhile, sits in her car, waiting for the right moment to kill Elisa. James, concerned for Elisa's safety, keeps an eye on Bonnie. Overwhelmed by her thoughts, Elisa accidentally injures herself while working in the kitchen. As time passes, Bonnie takes out her gun and a piece of Elisa's dress from the glove compartment, steps out of the car, and heads towards the cafe. James enters Bonnie's car and discovers Clive's book, realizing that he was Bonnie's murdered lover. James comes to understand that Bonnie intends to kill both him and Elisa and is responsible for sending them the bullets with their names on them. In a supermarket, a police officer named Saeed is purchasing a cake for his daughter's upcoming birthday. While paying at the cashier, he mentions a recent case where a hotel manager's body was found in a closet, having been shot in the head. Before leaving the supermarket, Saeed advises the cashier to be cautious during this time. As he gets into his car to go home, he receives an urgent call from the police station, instructing him to head to Lay's cafe as the suspect might be there. Minutes earlier, Bonnie returns Elisa's dress veil and tells her that James informed her about the cafe's location. Elisa is upset by James's apparent betrayal. To make amends for leaving Bonnie alone at the pharmacy, Elisa offers her baked goods. Elisa realizes that Bonnie is not harmful but merely eccentric when Bonnie asks for water from the kitchen, pulling out a gun, which James also sees from outside, causing him to hide behind the cafe. Elisa serves Bonnie the baked goods and water, and they sit together at a table. James uses a public phone to call the police for help, but the call ends abruptly due to poor service. An elderly customer exits the bathroom, surprising Bonnie, who thought they were alone. The old woman eats slowly, prolonging her stay, while James, feeling anxious and uncertain, enters the cafe through the bathroom window. Bonnie asks about James, and Elisa replies she doesn't know where he is. Bonnie then asks Elisa to call James and request his presence. Elisa is puzzled by Bonnie's request and inquires about her intentions. Bonnie reveals she doesn't need the veil anymore as she plans to divorce. She then points the gun at Elisa, confessing she killed her lover. Realizing the danger, Elisa understands she is about to be killed. The elderly customer finishes finishes her meal, promising to pay Elisa later, and leaves. Elisa recognizes that Bonnie sent her the bullet and questions why Bonnie killed Clive. Elisa explains that Clive was going to kill her, but Bonnie thinks she's lying. Elisa recounts how she and James broke into Clive's house, drank his alcohol, watched his recordings, and how Clive attacked and attempted to rape her while she was sleeping. Suddenly, a police car approaches the cafe. Elisa assures Bonnie she didn't call anyone. James, in the kitchen, arms himself with knives to defend Elisa. Bonnie orders Elisa to make the police leave, threatening to kill her otherwise. Officer Said exits his car and enters the cafe to check on the situation. He asks Elisa who called the police, to which she responds that she has no idea and everything is fine. Said surveys the cafe and, reassured that all is well, notices an apple pie on the counter. He requests a piece from Elisa. While in the kitchen, Elisa sees James hiding and is relieved he is there during such a time. As Said enjoys the pie, he discusses the murder case at the hotel. Bonnie is surprised that the police discovered the body so quickly. Elisa realizes that Bonnie's odd behavior was not due to an affair with the manager, but because she was killing him. After finishing his pie, Said asks Elisa for the bill. Elisa writes a message on the bill asking for help and gives it to him, but he refuses to take it, believing the bill to be $2 without any proof. Elisa's last attempt at calling for help fails. As Said leaves, he notices the gun Bonnie had hidden, leaving the cafe anxiously. Bonnie points the gun at Elisa, ordering her to close the door. James, seeing a cleaver in the kitchen, decides it will be more effective than knives. Bonnie, asking about James's whereabouts, hears a noise from the kitchen and goes there, finding James. Said calls the police station, reporting that the murder suspect is in the cafe and armed. Elisa is frustrated with James for revealing himself and ruining everything. She tells Bonnie that she lied to protect James. When James asks why Bonnie hasn't killed them yet, Bonnie replies that she wanted to talk first. Elisa insists that Clive was trying to rape and kill her, but Bonnie doesn't believe the accusations against her lover. Elisa claims Clive lured girls to his house to kill them, but Bonnie still refuses to believe it and raises her gun, insisting Clive truly loved her and they took him away by killing him. James admits he killed Clive, not Elisa, and asks Bonnie to kill him and leave Elisa alone. Elisa, unwilling to let James take the blame alone, confesses her involvement in the murder. Bonnie decides to punish them, but Elisa says she's already being punished every day and never leaves her house. Bonnie cries, contemplating her actions, while Elisa tells her they are not sorry for killing Clive. Suddenly, Bonnie fires the gun, seemingly killing them as the cafe fills with blood. Overwhelmed and in shock, Bonnie cries as she stares at the bodies. However, it turns out she didn't kill them. She was imagining it, and they are still alive in front of her. Unable to bear her torment, Bonnie decides to commit suicide and places the gun under her chin. However, James and Elisa prevent her, restraining her on the ground and removing the weapon. Bonnie cries, exhausted from everything happening to her, until she calms down upon hearing the approaching police sirens coming to arrest her. Elisa is at the police station with her mother and aunt, reflecting on the day Clive was killed. James is in the interrogation room, giving his testimony regarding Bonnie's case. Meanwhile, Bonnie gets up to make coffee and is startled to see Clive in the hallway. Realizing it's her imagination, she decides she can't bear living this way and resolves to take action. In the interrogation room, James signs his statement. He learns from the officer that Bonnie's fate, whether imprisonment or execution, is yet to be determined. James suggests that Bonnie needs psychological help and rehabilitation. When the officer asks if they can contact him through his girlfriend Elisa, James clarifies that she is not his girlfriend. After the interrogation, James asks about Elisa and is told by Leigh that she left a message for him. The message indicates that Elisa went to do something and asked Leigh to take care of James, which worries him. He searches for Elisa at her house and then at Todd's, but neither location yields any information about her whereabouts. James then visits the bridge where Elisa once considered suicide, but doesn't find her there. Returning to Leigh's cafe, he recalls the previous day's events with Bonnie, but still doesn't find Elisa. He decides to search for her in a specific place. 2 hours earlier, Elisa, while getting coffee at the station, borrows a pen and paper from a policewoman and writes the message for James. She asks the policewoman to deliver it to her Aunt Leigh and then leaves. Elisa takes a public bus where a man sitting next to her invades her space and tells her to smile more. She angrily tells him to move away and not talk to her. She gets off the bus and goes to Clive's house, reminiscing about dancing with James. She leaves her jacket on the stairs and heads to the room where Clive had attempted to assault her. Meanwhile, James drives, recalling his childhood days with his mother before her suicide. Elisa is in the room, thinking about the day of the incident, and eventually jumps into the swimming pool. James arrives at Clive's house, finds Elisa's jacket on the stairs, and, fearing the worst, calls out for her. He is relieved to hear her voice and sees her, wet from the the pool, safe and unharmed. James breaks down, thinking she left a suicide note and was going to harm herself. Elisa hugs him and apologizes for making him worry. The two go to the place where James's parents first met, under a bridge, to scatter his father's ashes. James discovers the ashes have turned to mud, but still spreads them on the ground, hoping to move on from his father's memory. They then visit an open-air restaurant. Elisa confesses she heard James say, "I love you," while she was sleeping by the garage, and admits she loves him too, but needs time to heal mentally and become normal. She also needs to repay her mother the $10,000 she owes. Elisa holds James's burned hand as they admire the beautiful natural scenery before them.